The inside of the Sherman tank smelled like oil, metal, and fear. Even with snow falling outside in the Ardennes forest, the air inside the steel shell was thick and hot, heavy with sweat and smoke. The engine rumbled under the crew's boots. It wasn't the loudest sound. It was the vibration that chilled them. The ground itself was humming, slow, deep, steady. That meant only one thing. A tiger was coming. Private Raymond Carter gripped the shell with both hands. He had done this hundreds of times, in training, in combat. This was routine. Load, close the breech, step back. But this time, something felt wrong. The shell was heavier. Not by much, maybe just a few ounces. But it was enough for him to notice. Enough to make his pulse spike. He looked at it quickly. Brass casing, 75 millimeter armor-piercing round. But the balance felt off. He could not say why. It just felt different, packed tighter, hotter. Maybe it had more propellant. Maybe it was just a manufacturing error. Maybe he was imagining it. There was no time to check, no time to think. Raymond shoved the shell into the breech, slammed it shut, and gave the signal. "Up!" he shouted. The gunner fired. The Sherman's 75 millimeter gun exploded with recoil. The tank shook. Carter braced himself. But then came something unexpected. The Tiger across the field shuddered. Smoke burst from its front plate. A gash opened in its armor, frontal armor, where no Sherman round was ever supposed to penetrate. Not at this angle. Not at this distance. Not with this gun. The Tiger stopped moving. Inside the Sherman, no one spoke for several seconds. What just happened? Carter blinked, still holding the next shell. His loader's instincts were yelling for him to keep going. But his mind was frozen. That shot should not have worked. It defied the math. It defied every manual he had ever seen. They had been told, again and again, the 75 millimeter gun cannot pierce the front of a Tiger tank. And yet, it had. Was it luck? Was it a miracle? Or had something inside that shell, a mistake, an accident, changed everything? This is the story of one loader, one impossible shot, and the shell that was never supposed to work, but did. The myth of the Tiger. To understand why that one shot from Raymond Carter was so shocking, you have to understand what the American forces were up against. The Tiger I was not just another German tank. It was a fortress on tracks. Its full name was Panzerkampfwagen, 6 Tiger Ausführung E. But to the Allied soldiers who saw it on the battlefield, it was known by a shorter, simpler word, just Tiger. And that was enough. The Tiger weighed approximately 57 tons. That is over 125,000 pounds of reinforced steel. Its armor on the front hull and turret was 100 millimeters thick. That is nearly 4 inches. The Germans did not just make it strong, they made it terrifying. Its main gun was an 88 millimeter KWK 36L/56 cannon. It had already earned a deadly reputation in the German anti-aircraft corps. On the ground, it was even more devastating. From over a mile away, more than 1,600 meters, a Tiger could destroy an American Sherman tank with a single shot. Meanwhile, the Sherman's own 75 millimeter gun could barely penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at 200 meters. That is less than 1/8 of the range. In the chaos of combat, that range difference was a death sentence. American crews knew this. Many called their own tank the Ronson. That was a reference to a cigarette lighter. Why? Because, as the grim joke went, it lights up the first time, every time. That was their fate when a Sherman took a direct hit, especially in the fuel tank or ammo storage. The fire would spread instantly. The crew had seconds to escape, sometimes less. The Tiger, by contrast, was often unharmed even after taking multiple hits. Its treads were wide enough to move through snow, mud, even rubble. Its optics were better. Its gun was more accurate. And its armor, especially from the front, was considered untouchable by anything short of a direct hit from an aircraft or a powerful anti-tank gun like the American 90mm or the British 17-pounder. The German High Command used the Tiger for more than combat. They used it for fear. In propaganda posters, it was painted like a beast. Unstoppable, merciless, larger than life. The message was simple. No Allied tank can destroy a Tiger. And for a long time, that message seemed true. There were battle reports where a single Tiger, well-positioned and well-crewed, destroyed over a dozen Allied vehicles in one encounter. In one infamous case, a Tiger commanded by German tank ace Michael Wittmann took out 21 vehicles in under 15 minutes. This wasn't just a tank, it was a legend, a psychological weapon. So when a Sherman tank, any Sherman, scored a kill on a Tiger, it was more than just rare, it was shocking. And when it happened through the front plate, that was supposed to be impossible. American manuals said it could not be done. Gunnery training emphasized flanking the Tiger, aiming for the sides, the rear, or even the tracks. A frontal shot was a waste of ammo, and if you tried it, you would only expose yourself to the Tiger's wrath. That was the battlefield Carter lived in. Those were the odds. And yet, that one day, his 75mm round fired straight into the face of a Tiger and went through. It was not just unbelievable, it was unthinkable. And it all started with a shell that felt just a little too heavy. Raymond Carter was 20 years old. He had never been to college. He had never traveled outside of Iowa before the war. Before the draft, he spent his days working on his family's farm, shoveling grain, fixing engines, and watching the weather more carefully than most people watch the news. Then came the letter. He was drafted in the summer of 1943, trained at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and assigned to a Sherman crew as the loader, the man who feeds the gun. In a tank crew, everyone has a role. The driver keeps the beast moving. The gunner finds and aims at the target. The commander makes the calls. And the loader? The loader has no time to think. His job is motion. Grab the round. Slam it into the breech. Step back. Brace. Repeat. Every few seconds, through chaos and fire, it's his hands that determine whether the gun fires again or falls silent. Raymond was fast. He was precise. But more than anything, he was steady. He had the kind of quiet nerves that came from years of hauling hay at 5 a.m. and repairing tractors without instructions. But no farm ever prepared him for this. The inside of a Sherman tank was cramped, dark, and brutally loud. There was no insulation, no space to stretch, no comfort. In summer, it felt like a furnace. In winter, it trapped the cold in your boots and bones. Inside, you were always touching something metal, and metal always remembered the last explosion. The floor shook constantly. Screws worked themselves loose. Smoke lingered. Oil stuck to your skin. And for Raymond, every battle was just a countdown. A count of shells, a count of seconds, a count of breaths. His crew trusted him. He loaded clean, fast, and never jammed the breech. In training, he could reload in under 5 seconds. In combat, he did it even faster. But he never thought of himself as a hero. He never wanted medals. All he wanted was to get through the day, keep the crew alive, and make it back to the farm where things made sense. They had seen action in France. They had pushed through Belgium. And by December of 1944, they were stationed in the Ardennes, cold, tired, and surrounded by rumors of a German counteroffensive. Then one morning, wrapped in fog and silence, they rolled into a patch of trees. The radio crackled. Movement ahead. 2 Tigers. Waiting. Raymond's hands tightened. He knew what that meant. One hit from an 88mm shell, and their tank was gone. That was it. As the Sherman jolted to a stop, he reached down to grab the next shell. That's when he felt it. It was subtle. A difference in weight. Maybe a difference in balance. He had handled hundreds of these rounds, and something about this one was off. He hesitated. Not long, just a second. But in a tank fight, a second is everything. He looked to the commander. No time. The order was clear. Load it. And he did. He shoved the strange round into the breech, slammed it shut, and stepped back. The gunner pulled the trigger. The shell was on its way. And in that single moment, the myth of the Tiger, and everything Raymond Carter thought he knew about his own weapon, was about to be tested. A tiger in the fog. The trees were silent. It was morning, but the sky was gray, and the fog rolled in thick through the Ardennes. The kind of fog that swallowed sound and made every shape feel closer than it was. Private Raymond Carter's Sherman tank moved slowly along a dirt path, part of a scouting patrol. The road was narrow, flanked by trees that looked skeletal in the winter light. The crew was alert, but no one expected what came next. The radio crackled. Then a sharp voice. "Tiger, 2 o'clock." Everyone inside the tank froze. There was no mistaking the silhouette. Broad turret, sloped sides, long, deliberate cannon. A Tiger tank, just 200 meters ahead, was turning to face them. Another Tiger appeared just beyond it. It was an ambush. The Sherman's commander shouted. The driver slammed into reverse, but the tracks caught on ice and mud. The tank lurched and rocked. Inside, the gunner shouted, "Loaded!" Carter was already moving. He grabbed the first shell from the rack, standard armor piercing, and jammed it into the breech. "Up!" he yelled. The gunner fired. The shell flew across the short distance. It hit the Tiger's frontal plate and sparked, but bounced. Harmless. "Didn't even scratch it," the gunner growled. Then the Tiger returned fire. The German 88mm cannon roared like thunder. The round struck the Sherman just to the side. A near miss, but the shock wave rattled the entire crew. A second Sherman in the patrol was not so lucky. Its turret was hit directly. A fireball lit up the fog. The crew didn't get out. Carter knew they were next. He dropped to the ammo rack and reached for another round. That's when he felt it. The shell in his hand felt different, just slightly. Heavier, warmer. The weight was off and he felt it in his wrists. He looked at it quickly. It looked the same as every other 75mm armor piercing round he had handled since Normandy. But it wasn't the same. Not inside. There was no time to ask, no time to question it. The commander called out again. "Load!" Carter shoved the shell into the breech and slammed it shut. The recoil pad was already shaking in anticipation. "Up!" the gunner fired. The tank bucked from the recoil. The sound inside the turret was deafening. And then, silence. No return fire. The men waited, listening. Then came a voice from outside. "You hit it!" Carter opened the hatch, just high enough to see. The Tiger was stopped. Black smoke poured from a breach in its frontal turret armor, dead center. Its crew was bailing out, panicked, scrambling from hatches as fire licked the air behind them. Carter stared at the wreckage. That was the same spot they had hit before. But this time, the shell had gone through. Right through the armor. Through the part they were told was impossible. He felt the vibration still in his chest. Not from the tank's engine, but from what he had just witnessed. It didn't make sense. That shell should not have penetrated. Not from the front. Not at 200 meters. Not from a 75mm gun. And yet it had. The crew stared at each other. The commander blinked. The gunner just said, "What the hell?" Carter didn't speak. He only looked down at the empty shell casing that had been ejected. The one that had changed everything. Whatever had been inside that round, whatever made it different, had just done the impossible. Could that really happen? For the next hour, Raymond Carter said almost nothing. After the ambush, after the smoke, after the kill, the Sherman crew moved on. But inside that turret, no one could stop thinking about the same question. How? How did a standard 75mm Sherman round punch through the front armor of a Tiger tank? Every training manual said it couldn't. Every instructor had repeated it over and over. Frontal shots against a Tiger are a waste. The armor is too thick. The round will bounce or break. Flank it, trap it, or call in air support. That's the doctrine. That's the rule. But this time, the rule was broken. So what changed? Let's start with the math. A tank shell's ability to penetrate armor is based on kinetic energy. That energy comes from two things: the mass of the shell and its velocity at the moment it hits the target. But here's the key. Kinetic energy increases with the square of the velocity. That means even a small increase in speed can have a huge impact on penetration. The standard 75mm armor-piercing round, fired by the M4 Sherman, had a muzzle velocity of about 619 meters per second. At 200 meters, that round could penetrate roughly 88 millimeters of armor at a straight angle. But the Tiger's frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick. That is already beyond the Sherman's reliable limit. So what if the shell Carter loaded had more propellant? What if, for some reason, an accident at the factory, a mislabeling, or a variation in powder fill, the cartridge had just a little too much punch? A 10% increase in muzzle velocity could result in over 20% more impact energy. That would bring penetration closer to 100 millimeters, enough to pierce the Tiger's front armor under the right conditions. And that's not even accounting for other variables. If the armor was hit at a slight angle, if the steel had manufacturing inconsistencies, or if the shell struck a known weak point, like a joint between plates or near a weld seam, the odds improve. Now consider this. In wartime production, mistakes happen. Some shells were underloaded, others were overloaded. Quality control varied from factory to factory. And as the war dragged on, Allied ammunition plants were under immense pressure to meet demand. Was it possible that Carter had loaded a shell that, unintentionally, had a few extra grams of propellant? Yes. And more importantly, was that enough to make the difference? Physically, yes. But there was a cost. Overcharged shells push a tank gun beyond its safe operating limits. The pressure inside the breech spikes. That increases the chance of a catastrophic failure. Cracking the barrel, damaging the recoil system, or even exploding inside the tank. It is the reason tank ammunition is tested and measured so precisely. It is also why soldiers are strictly forbidden to tamper with rounds in the field. But Carter didn't tamper. He just loaded the next round in the rack. A round that, by all appearances, was standard. Only it wasn't. That tiny difference in weight, the one he noticed in his hands, might have been the only warning. And that might have been the only reason they survived. Because on that day, in that fog, under fire from the most feared tank in the German arsenal, something inside that overfilled shell defied the rulebook. And it worked. The legend of the lucky round. They didn't talk much about it at first. Raymond Carter's crew rolled on after the engagement, quiet, shaken, and still processing what had just happened. But in war, stories don't stay quiet for long. By that evening, someone in another Sherman crew had already heard the news. Carter's tank took out a Tiger, head on. Word spread faster than the tanks could move. By the end of the week, it was all over the company. By the end of the month, units from entirely different divisions were repeating the story. Slightly changed, slightly exaggerated, but always with the same punchline. One shot, right through the front, killed it dead. Some added that the Tiger exploded. Others said it cracked in half. Some said Carter had made the shell himself, packed it with extra powder, like a moonshiner spiking his own brew. None of that was true. Raymond Carter never claimed credit. He never bragged, and he never gave an explanation. When someone asked him, weeks later, what had happened, he simply said, "I loaded the shell. The gunner fired. It went through." But in the ranks, that wasn't enough. A story like that doesn't just stay factual. It grows. Soon, they gave the shell a name. Some called it the lucky round. Others, the ghost shell. One sergeant started calling Carter the Tiger Tamer. It stuck for a while. In mess halls and muddy tents, the story became something more than a battlefield report. It became a symbol, a moment of hope, a reminder that sometimes, somehow, David really could bring down Goliath. But not everyone liked the attention. A few officers raised eyebrows. Regulations were clear. No unauthorized ammunition modifications. No off-the-books firepower experiments. If someone had tampered with a shell, there could be consequences, even court-martial. So Carter's commander submitted a brief after-action report. Just the basics. No speculation. No mention of the shell feeling heavier. Just this. Engaged German Tiger tank at 200 meters. Fired 2 rounds. First ineffective. Second penetrated frontal armor. Target disabled. Crew bailed. It was safe. Sanitized. But the men in the tanks knew better. They had seen what happened. And even if no one could explain it, they felt the truth. Something was different about that shell. Years later, veterans would still mention it in interviews, memoirs, and reunion talks. They would say, "Remember that kid Carter? The one who loaded that freak round that dropped a Tiger?" Nobody could prove it. But nobody ever forgot it. Because in a war filled with death and routine and fire, that shot was different. That shot gave people something to believe in. From overfilled shells to HVAP, Raymond Carter never knew what was inside that shell. He never opened it, never asked, never tried to repeat it. He just did his job. But his shot, accidental or not, reflected something bigger happening across the Allied war effort. The Americans had a problem. By late 1944, it was clear that the standard 75mm Sherman gun was no longer enough. The German Tigers, Panthers, and even late-model Panzer IV tanks had better armor and longer-range firepower. The U.S. Army needed more punch, and fast. In response, American engineers began pushing out upgrades. The 76mm M1 gun was introduced. It had higher muzzle velocity and better armor penetration than the 75. Many Shermans were retrofitted with it, especially those assigned to tank destroyer units. But hardware alone wasn't the full solution. A new type of ammunition was being rushed into production, HVAP, high velocity armor piercing. Technically, it was called APCR, armor piercing composite rigid, but troops called it HVAP. This round used a tungsten core inside a lightweight aluminum casing, allowing it to fly faster and hit harder, much harder. The standard 76mm round had a muzzle velocity of about 815 meters per second. The HVAP round pushed that to over 1,000 meters per second. That kind of speed changed everything. Tests showed that HVAP could penetrate up to 177 millimeters of armor at 100 meters. That was more than enough to defeat the frontal plate of a Tiger or a Panther if you had the right shot. But there was a problem: scarcity. Tungsten was rare, expensive, and tightly rationed. Most HVAP rounds were prioritized for tank destroyers, not frontline Shermans. Some units never saw a single crate. So even as the war entered its final phase, many tankers still fought with outdated guns and underpowered ammo. They improvised. They learned to flank. They learned to fire in volleys. And sometimes, just sometimes, they got lucky. Or maybe, like Raymond Carter, they found something no manual could explain. But make no mistake, stories like his helped drive change. After-action reports, survivor accounts, even rumors from the front. They reached the ordnance offices, the ballistics labs, the policymakers. Engineers read those stories, and they took them seriously. One ordnance officer, years later, said it plainly. If a loader notices a difference in weight, we listen, because that means something real happened. So while Carter's shot was never officially recorded as anything more than a battlefield oddity, its meaning echoed far beyond that foggy clearing in the Ardennes. It pointed toward a future where American tanks no longer had to hope for miracles. Because the next generation of shells, HVAP, discarding sabot rounds, even experimental recoilless weapons, was already on the drawing board. Carter didn't know it, but in some small way, his hands had helped steer the future of American firepower. Not through design, through instinct, through action, through survival. The American way of war. What Raymond Carter did that day, whether by instinct, accident, or divine luck, was more than a fluke. It was a snapshot of something deeper. The American way of war. It wasn't just about tanks or guns. It was about how Americans fought, how they adapted, how they won. The German military had built the Tiger to be perfect, on paper: thick armor, long gun, superior optics. It was a masterpiece of engineering. But it was also slow to build, expensive to maintain, and produced in limited numbers. By contrast, the United States built over 49,000 Sherman tanks. They weren't invincible. They weren't revolutionary. But they were good enough, and there were enough of them. More importantly, the men inside those tanks were taught something different from their enemies. They were taught to improvise, to innovate, to think under pressure, even when thinking wasn't in the manual. The Germans relied on precision. The Americans relied on people. People like Raymond Carter, a farm boy from Iowa, who didn't freeze when things went sideways, who trusted his instincts, who loaded the shell that didn't feel right because there was no time to second guess. That spirit, improvise, adapt, overcome, was everywhere in the American military. When their tanks couldn't go toe-to-toe with Tigers, they flanked. When their guns couldn't penetrate front armor, they upgraded their ammo. When nothing else worked, they figured something out. They didn't wait for permission. They acted. One military historian once said it this way: "The Germans made the best tanks. The Americans made the best crews." That's the legacy Carter became part of, not because he was trying to be a hero, but because he did what Americans do best. He faced a problem, and he didn't freeze. He loaded the round. He made it count. And whether or not he changed the war, in that moment, he showed the world something no blueprint ever could. You can't out-engineer instinct. One shot, one lesson. Raymond Carter never received a medal for that shot. He never asked for one. After the war, he went home to Iowa, back to the farm, back to tractors and grain silos and weather reports. He rarely spoke about the war. And when he did, it was always the same story. I was the loader. That was my job. Years later, at a reunion with his tank crew, someone brought it up again. "The Tiger," they said. "That shot, you remember?" Carter smiled. "I remember thinking we weren't going to make it. I remember grabbing a round that felt heavier than it should have. And I remember the sound that Tiger made when it stopped moving." He paused. "I didn't want to kill a tank," he said. "I just didn't want to die." That was Raymond Carter, not a hero in his own mind, just a young man, barely 20, caught in a moment where instinct met opportunity and changed everything. That shot has become a story passed from tankers to historians, from veterans to classrooms. And whether you believe it was an accident, a lucky strike, or a one-in-a-million shell, one thing is undeniable: it happened. In the fog of war, when logic failed and numbers said no, one loader's hands said yes. And for a few seconds, the myth of the Tiger cracked. What does that tell us? That war isn't just won by generals and factories. It's won by people, by small decisions made under pressure, by courage that doesn't look like speeches. It looks like hands shaking, a shell being shoved into place, and a trigger being pulled with nothing but hope behind it. One shot, one moment, one lesson. Even the impossible is possible when you're not ready to give up. What shocked you most about this story? Let us know in the comments below.